541 million years ago, Earth did something so extreme it still feels impossible. For most of our planet's history, life was small, strange, almost invisible. Then, in what looks like a geological instant, the oceans erupted with hunters, armor, eyes, teeth, limbs, and nightmares made of flesh. It was as if evolution suddenly slammed its foot on the accelerator. Scientists call it the Cambrian Explosion. But that name hides a deeper shock. This was not just a burst of creatures. It was the moment life learned to compete, to see, to kill, and to transform Earth forever. Imagine a world without forests, birdsong, or footprints on land. The continents are barren slabs of rock, scorched by sunlight and lashed by storms. There are no trees, no insects, no reptiles, no mammals, no human eyes to witness the scene. And yet, beneath the surface of the ancient seas, something astonishing is about to begin. In darkness lit only by filtered blue light, life is preparing for one of the greatest revolutions in the history of this planet. For nearly 3 billion years, Earth belonged to simplicity. Tiny cells drifted through oceans like living dust. Even when multicellular organisms finally appeared, they seemed soft, passive, almost dreamlike. Strange quilted creatures lay on the seafloor of the Ediacaran world, absorbing nutrients, leaving little trace of struggle. It was a planet where life existed, but barely seemed awake. Then, around 541 million years ago, that silence shattered. Suddenly, the fossil record begins to blaze with innovation. Bodies become harder, faster, sharper. Shells appear, spines emerge, mouths open, limbs multiply. Eyes, perhaps the most dangerous invention in the history of life, begin scanning the water for movement. In what geologists describe as a brief interval, perhaps 20 to 25 million years, nearly every major animal body plan that would shape future life makes its entrance. Arthropods, early chordates, worms, mollusks, echinoderms. The basic blueprints of the animal kingdom arrive in a burst so dramatic that even now it feels less like evolution and more like detonation. That is why the Cambrian Explosion has haunted science for generations. Charles Darwin himself was troubled by it. His theory predicted gradual change across immense spans of time. But here was a chapter in Earth's history where complexity seemed to surge forward with unsettling speed. He hoped missing fossils would someday soften the mystery. Instead, the deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. Because the Cambrian was not merely a moment when more animals appeared. It was a moment when life changed its rules. The oceans of the Cambrian were not peaceful nurseries. They were becoming battlefields. Predators emerged with grasping limbs and circular mouths lined with teeth. Prey responded with armor, burrowing, camouflage, and speed. Evolution was no longer just about surviving the environment. Now it was about surviving each other. For the first time on a grand scale, life was forced into an arms race. Every improvement in sensing, movement, or attack triggered another in defense, escape, or deception. The sea had become a laboratory of fear. And what rose from that fear was beauty and horror intertwined. Creatures like Anomalocaris, with its alien body and forward-facing hunting tools, patrolled the water like an evolutionary warning. Trilobites marched across the seafloor in vast numbers, their hard exoskeletons preserving their forms for 500 million years. Tiny animals developed elaborate spikes, segmented bodies, and bizarre feeding apparatuses unlike anything in earlier worlds. The Cambrian did not simply produce life. It produced experimentation on a wild, almost delirious scale. This matters because, in a very real sense, this is where our story begins. Buried inside that explosion of forms are the early roots of nervous systems, mobility, predation, perception, and eventually vertebrates. Long before dinosaurs, long before mammals, long before humans asked where they came from, the answer was already taking shape in those turbulent seas. Was it oxygen rising, genes unlocking new possibilities, ecosystems crossing a fatal threshold, or something more unsettling, that once vision appeared, innocence ended forever? But what could force life to transform so suddenly, so violently, and so completely? What happened to Earth that made evolution stop whispering and start screaming? To understand the Cambrian Explosion, we have to look beyond the creatures themselves and examine the planet that produced them. Because life does not evolve in isolation. It responds to pressure, chemistry, temperature, geography, catastrophe. And by the dawn of the Cambrian, Earth was no longer the quiet world it had once been. The stage had been rebuilt. The oceans were changing. The atmosphere was changing. Even the architecture of the seafloor was changing. Evolution did not suddenly become creative for no reason. The world had become dangerously full of opportunity. One of the first suspects is oxygen. For much of Earth's early history, oxygen was either absent or limited, and complex bodies are expensive structures to maintain. Muscles demand energy. Nervous systems demand energy. Hunting, escaping, digging, sensing, reproducing at speed, all of it demands energy. As oxygen levels in the oceans and atmosphere gradually rose, life may have crossed an invisible threshold. Suddenly, bodies could afford to become larger, more active, and more sophisticated. Not because evolution had a plan, but because the planet had finally opened a door that had long been locked. But oxygen alone cannot explain the madness of the Cambrian. Another key may lie in genetics. Long before the explosion itself, animals had likely evolved the molecular toolkit needed to build complex forms. Among the most important were developmental control genes, including Hox genes, which help tell a growing embryo where to place its head, tail, limbs, segments, and organs. These genes did not create animals by themselves, but they gave evolution a new instrument panel. With relatively small genetic changes, bodies could now be rearranged, extended, armored, segmented, or radically transformed. It was as if life had spent ages collecting parts in silence, then suddenly learned how to assemble machines. At the same time, the environment was becoming more unstable and more productive. Continents were breaking apart. Shallow seas spread across wide areas of the planet, flooding continental margins with sunlight and nutrients. These marine shelves became evolutionary arenas, rich enough to support more food, more interactions, and more ecological experimentation. In such places, even a modest improvement, a harder shell, a sharper sense, a quicker body could mean the difference between thriving and vanishing. And once natural selection finds an advantage, it does not politely pause. It compounds. Then came the most unsettling trigger of all, vision. The evolution of eyes may have changed life more profoundly than almost any event before it. A world of mostly blind organisms is a world of slow encounters and limited information. But once animals could detect motion, distance, contrast, and shape, the entire logic of survival changed. Predators could target, prey could flee, camouflage became useful, speed became essential, armor became urgent. Some scientists have called this a visual arms race, and the phrase is almost too gentle. In evolutionary terms, it was an emergency. The fossil record reveals this escalation with startling clarity. In sites like the Burgess Shale in Canada and Chengjiang in China, paleontologists uncovered entire communities of Cambrian life preserved in exquisite detail. There were delicate gills, digestive tracts, compound eyes, grasping appendages, and body designs so bizarre they once seemed to belong to failed experiments from another planet. Yet these were not failures. They were evidence of a biosphere trying everything at once. And here is the twist. The Cambrian explosion may not have been a single sudden miracle at all. It may have been the visible climax of a much longer hidden buildup, an evolutionary chain reaction prepared in darkness for tens of millions of years before it burst into the fossil record. If that is true, then the explosion was not just about appearance. It was about revelation. And if the foundations of our animal world were built in competition, fear, and relentless innovation, what does that say about the deeper laws that still govern life now? The most disturbing truth about the Cambrian explosion is that it was not simply a creative event. It was a violent restructuring of reality. Before it, life was mostly soft, slow, and hidden. After it, the planet belonged to movement, detection, pursuit, escape, injury, and death on a scale never seen before. Evolution had discovered conflict as a generator of complexity, and once that door opened, it never closed again. In the Cambrian seas, the basic dramas that still govern animal existence were being written for the first time. Hunter and hunted, signal and response, armor and weapon, perception and deception. What appeared in those oceans was not just biodiversity. It was the beginning of biological tension, the moment life ceased to be merely alive and became alert. The world was no longer something organisms simply occupied. It had become something they had to interpret, outmaneuver, and survive. That shift changed Earth forever, because from those experimental bodies emerged the long lineage of creatures that would inherit the planet. Among the early chordates of the Cambrian were faint, fragile hints of a design that would eventually produce fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and us. Inside that ancient burst of innovation lay the distant foundations of spinal cords, directional movement, centralized brains, and bodies built to navigate a dangerous world. The Cambrian did not contain humanity, but it made humanity possible. And yet the deeper implication is even larger. The Cambrian explosion suggests that life on Earth is not shaped only by slow adaptation to climate or chemistry. It is shaped by thresholds. Moments when enough conditions align, oxygen, genes, ecology, competition, and suddenly evolution enters a new regime. The rules do not merely continue, they escalate. Complexity does not rise like a calm staircase. Sometimes it surges like a breached dam. That idea changes how we see the history of life. It means the familiar world around us, forests, coral reefs, insects, whales, wolves, human civilization itself, may rest on ancient turning points so precarious that if one variable had shifted slightly, none of this would exist. No vertebrates, no dinosaurs, no primates, no cities glowing at night, no one asking where they came from. The Cambrian was not just an explosion of forms, it was a narrowing of fate, a moment when countless possibilities were tested, and only some endured. It also changes how we think about alien life. If complex ecosystems require not one miracle, but a chain of thresholds, then worlds covered in microbes may be common, while worlds crowded with animals may be rare beyond imagination. Somewhere in the universe, life may remain trapped in simplicity for billions of years, never reaching the point where eyes evolve, predators appear, and intelligence begins its long, uncertain ascent. In that sense, the Cambrian explosion may be one of the most important events not just in Earth's history, but in the story of life as a cosmic phenomenon. And there is one final unsettling reflection. We often imagine evolution as progress, as if life was always moving toward beauty, intelligence, and awareness. But the Cambrian reminds us that the engine of transformation may be far colder than that. Complexity rose not because nature was kind, but because survival became harder. Vision sharpened because danger demanded it. Brains expanded because the world became a problem to solve. We measure our history in kings, empires, and centuries. But long before humanity carved names into stone, the oldest revolution had already begun beneath forgotten seas. In silence, in darkness, among creatures stranger than dreams, Earth invented the struggle that would one day produce us. And perhaps that is the deepest mystery of all. That everything we call civilization, consciousness, and self began when life first learned to fear the eyes of another.